Ossie was introduced to me by my uncle, Uncle Guy, and Ossie had the most fantastic gift that he gave my cousin Louise, who very sadly, none of the Scammels can be here today. They would like to be, but it's Guy's birthday, so they're celebrating it as a family weekend away. But Ossie very kindly gave the gift of a transplant to Louise. I forget what age she was, Ossie now. 14. And in fact, she's just had her second transplant, which Ossie's son gave to her, which is really exciting. But Ossie is a real expert about this. He's going to talk about transplantation.
Neil Turner pointed this out, and he showed the problem with this, and as they call it, the basket weave basement membrane, which is the filter in those little elements that go to make up a kidney, become more porous, and that is how the blood leaks out of it and the proteins leak out of it. Now, at the time, I want to take you back to 1968 when I started in transplantation. It seems a long time ago, but the Royal Free Hospital had then done 3 transplants with Professor Roy Khan. You may have heard of him because he was involved in developing a lot of immunosuppressive drugs and responsible for liver transplants in this country. And in a slide that I had prepared then, there were contraindications to transplantation, and it shows the level to which we have now improved. Fabry's disease, again, which is an inherited disorder, Alport's, contraindication to transplants, focal sclerosis, oxaluria, and there was a whole list, and even non-compliance with drugs. And the reason for this was, one, they didn't know for sure whether if a relative gave the kidney, the disease would be transmitted to the new transplant. And the other thing was we were short of kidneys. One of my early jobs was, in fact, to go from hospital to hospital to encourage cadaver donation, cadaver kidney donation. It took a long time before we were able to set up the national service of retrieving kidneys so that they became available to everybody and they were shared. So we've come a long way since then. So as I said, there was this worry about what they called recurrence of diseases. There was also anxiety about the living donor. We didn't have the knowledge then that we have now. The genetic pattern couldn't be defined at that time, although we knew that it was inherited and that it was linked to one of the chromosomes. So if the patient had the slightest degree of proteinuria, any elevation of blood pressure, any microhematuria, the patient, the donor, would be excluded from donating a kidney. There was also, at that time, the fear of what was called anti-GBM disease, anti-glomerular basement membrane disease, which did develop in some of these kidneys. So because of this, there was this fear not to do transplants. Now, in doing transplantation, there is a choice between having a living donor or a kidney from a cadaver or an accident case or a brain-dead donor. And the selection process of a living donor, the process must take into account the genetics and the natural history of Alport syndrome in order to avoid nephrectomy in family members who themselves may be at risk for development of the disease at a later stage. So one has to carefully screen a possible living related donor. Having said that, there are a number of patients who indeed are carriers who haven't manifested the disease and have given the kidney because the same way that a mother says, no, I want to donate this kidney, and I know certainly the cases that are reported, they've had to sign a disclaimer which says, in case I go into kidney failure at a later date, I won't blame you for doing this transplant, but I want to see my child well. And you all know how important it is for children to have a transplant. They can have dialysis, but it does affect their growth, it does affect their development, it does affect their education. So because of this reason, it's very important to try and get them transplanted early. So the other thing that clinicians providing post-transplant care, and they must be aware of a potential complication that is absolutely unique to this disease. It is called the development of anti-GBM disease. Now, this is not a recurrence of the Alports. It's very similar, but a different disease. It doesn't happen often. It's only, I believe, it's 1 in 20?
Maybe 1 in 40.
Maybe 1 in 40. So the chance of the disease coming back is rare, but it has to be taken into account. I want to tell you the story of Louise, just to show how successful this can be. She was born in 75, so she was 14 when she went into kidney failure, and the mother was a carrier, so we could not use her. The brother was young, and we couldn't use him. And the father had hypertension and a few other medical problems. So we put her on the cadaver waiting list, and in January 1990, she received a transplant which was extremely successful for 20 years. And then she developed not recurrence of the disease or not the anti-GBM disease. Now, one of the things that's happened is, earlier on, we didn't have facilities for what is called electron microscopy, which can look at these basement membranes to a huge magnification. You can do that now, and you can make these diagnoses. A lot of the kidneys that are lost after 20, 30 years after transplantation are lost because of what we call aging of the kidney, rather a chronic process of rejection. So the kidney then fails gradually, but not due to a recurrence. So the message is you can transplant, and then in May 2011, when the kidney failed, my son, who is now a transplant surgeon, he is not here today, did a second live donor. Now, this is another thing that's happened over the years. At the beginning, the rules were a living donor had to be closely related, mother, father, brother, or sister. We couldn't even go and take a kidney from a cousin. We've expanded how we can take kidneys now. The rules have changed. And that is not because of the demand, but because we have a better understanding of how we can transplant now. And indeed, this time round, she had what is called a three-way swap. Her best friend wanted to give her a kidney, but she wasn't a match. But with the UK transplant service that does the coordination of all the transplants today, they were able to arrange 2 other families so that the kidney from Louise's friend went to somebody in Ireland, the one from Ireland came to somebody in Glasgow, and the one from Glasgow came to Louise. So there is what is called, that was a three-way swap. And this is happening more and more in the country now. Now, you can say, is this arranged just on a friendly basis? No. There is what is called the Human Tissue Authority in the United Kingdom, where all these are screened carefully so that there's no hint of commercialism. There is not a hint of saying, I'll give it to you because you're going to look after me at a later date, or you can include me in your will. So the laws have changed in an ethical way so that you can swap these kidneys round. And I'm happy to say that it's a year on, and she is doing extremely well. This is Louise. Her hobby is horses. She lives, breeds, and looks after horses. And at the show jumping trials, this is her, and she's won on several occasions. So I'm coming round to telling you that it is not an absolute contraindication to transplantation. What is the problem? The shortage of cadaver kidneys. At the same time, the availability of kidneys means that even if you don't have a relative, you can be on a list and obtain a kidney from a cadaver donor. You can take a kidney now from an outside donor, an altruistic donor, who may match you and then be transplanted successfully. Clearly, you all know that immunosuppression has improved so much over the last 40 years. The drugs have improved to the point that even tissue matching is not an absolute requirement anymore. You can even cross what is called the ABO blood group barrier. We would not transplant blood group incompatible transplants when we started, but now we can cross the ABO barrier. So you don't need to have a closely matched kidney because the immunosuppression is so much better. There is, of course, continuing research. This group alone shows how, by collaboration, we can bring more success in this. And genetic testing, Francis will tell you, is improving every day. There is complicated testing, but it is becoming more available now. The other thing is plasma exchange, which at the beginning was not available, is now available even for recurrence. A note of caution about retransplantation. There's only a small group that develops this complication. But there is a report of this in an article in Kidney International. 14 patients received a second transplant, and out of them, 15 out of the 16 developed anti-GBM disease in the 30 months following transplantation. So it is very difficult then to go on to a third transplant. So there is this very rare group that develops the particular complication of anti-GBM disease. And that is the only worry you have about retransplantation. But a second transplant or retransplantation is possible. I think that's my last slide. Thank you.